Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's forum with the Israeli Ambassador to the United States of America, Mr. Danny Ayalon. My name is Shira Kaplan, and I'm a 23-year-old sophomore from Herzliya, studying government at the college here. Why am I so old, you may ask? Because as an Israeli citizen, I had to serve for 2 years in the Israeli Defense Force, where I was placed in the intelligence unit in the Negev. The Negev is what we Israelis refer to as the desert, simply because we've never been to Arizona before. For the past 14 years, I have participated in a program which I now believe to be the only hope for change in the Middle East, Seeds of Peace. For nearly a decade, I have been traveling across the Promised Land, the American Promised Land, that is, together with my Palestinian friends from Seeds of Peace, presenting an alternative to unilateralism, to bloodshed, and to war. My Palestinian friends and I do this not to undermine our governments, but to represent them loyally. We do this not because we hate our countries, but because we love them so much and want to see our countries, or rather make our countries, work with each other and not work against each other. At the college, I'm one of 6 Israeli undergraduate ambassadors to Harvard. At the end of the day, we're all ambassadors, whether we're from New Orleans, from Ramallah, or from Tel Aviv. I treasure every day here at Harvard because of the unparalleled opportunities, like tonight's forum with the ambassador, that are unheard of in the Middle East. As the head of the Arab-Jewish dialogue on campus, I bring the voice of the Israeli youth who want to translate patriotism into peacemaking and Zionism into coexistence. Sooner rather than later, I hope to follow in the ambassador's footsteps and serve my country and represent the pragmatic, educated mainstream. I might even one day run for office. Who knows? To introduce our distinguished speaker tonight, it is my privilege to welcome David Elwood, Dean of the John F. Kennedy School of Government, who will introduce the ambassador. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is David Elwood again, and I want to welcome you to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum here. And Shira, thank you very much for your words. From patriotism to peace is, I'm going to use that. Credit you for the first couple of times. But I do want to tell you one thing. 23 is not old. So thank you for that inspiration. So this is a wonderful night because tonight's guest is very much someone who has seen the consequences of war and conflict, but also I think sees the great opportunity and the great vision for peace. Ambassador Daniel Ayalon is the Israeli ambassador to the United States. He was appointed in July of 2002, and he's very much engaged in these issues on a daily basis. He played a leading role in the negotiations for the Roadmap to Peace and Israel's disengagement plan, including the exchange of letters on April 14, 2004, between President Bush and Prime Minister Sharon. Ambassador Ayalon has served the last 3 consecutive Israeli administrations, most recently as the Chief Foreign Policy Advisor to Prime Minister Sharon. From 1997 to 2001, he was the Deputy Foreign Policy Advisor to Prime Ministers Ehud Barak and Benjamin Netanyahu, my apologies, during which time he was a member of the Israeli delegations to a variety of critical conferences, including the Camp David Summit and the Y Plantation. As Israel's main representative of the United States, he meets regularly with business executives, academics, political leaders to promote a better understanding of Israel and to deepen cooperation at all levels. Ambassador Ayalon's work is critical to the prospect of peace in the Middle East. And for him, I think the costs and the benefits of peace are well known and well understood. And tonight, I look forward very much to hearing his insights from, everyone, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Daniel Ayalon.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Shalom and good evening. Thank you, Dean Elwood, for this very kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here and with all of you here, with Governor Shaheen and faculty, students. I know I have to be brief because the most interesting part is the Q&A. This is what I understand. But I have to start with a story which I hope you will appreciate. It's a story which is told in Washington, but I adapted it to Israel. I changed the name and venues, and maybe you will understand why. The story goes about this guy, Joe Levy, his name is, and he is a man who survived the flood in Tel Aviv in 1886. Anyone heard about this flood? You know Hayarkon River, which is like our Potomac, or overflew, and a few houses were kind of destroyed. Some people were unfortunately drowning. So his claim to fame was being the only survival of this flood of 1886 in Tel Aviv. So he went about building a career about that, giving speeches everywhere for that, until he came to an old age and he died. Went to heaven, and on his way to heaven, he was asked by the gatekeeper what was his career about. He said, I am a survivor of the flood of 1886, and I was talking about it to everyone who wanted to hear about it. So the guy told him, okay, well, your first lecture will be tomorrow, but just be mindful, in the audience, you will have Noah sitting. Now, I feel here like I'm among many Noahs here, as here we are in the shrine of academic excellence and renowned place here in Harvard. So it is really a privilege. I'm humbled by the invitation, and I hope we'll have a very good exchange. Let me start with what this week means for us Israelis, and I believe for most Jews around the globe. Always, this week in mid-spring is very symbolic for us. The 7 days, which started just 6 days ago and will culminate tomorrow, I would say are the most sacred in the Jewish calendar. They start with the commemoration of the Shoah, the Holocaust, which was the brutal, systematic, industrial, I would say, demeaning massacre of the Jewish people, 6 million of us in Europe, 1/3 of the people. And it culminates in tomorrow, which is the day of our independence, celebrating our independence. And there is a very strong line which connects these two dates. It's more than symbolic that we start this week with the day of commemoration of Holocaust and ending it with a commemoration or celebrating our independence. Because, unfortunately, I believe, as many historians do, that we would not have gained the support and legitimacy of the world, the international community, as a free nation in our own land without this great sacrifice. And this is really a pity. This is really very unfortunate. This is really cruel that any people should pay such a horrible price in order to get its birthright, very simple right to be sovereign, to be independent, to be free, in its own land, historic land, the land where we started as a people, a land which we have never forsaken, although there was this big expulsions, although for 2,000 years the majority of the Jewish people left all around the world, actually being at the mercy of many vagaries of different dictators and brutal people. But never was there a period without Jewish presence in our own home. So we had to earn it, unfortunately, with paying with 1/3 of our people dead. And the state of Israel very much is a tribute. It's a legacy. It's a commemoration of the legacy and memory of the 6 million. And I tell you all this not because tomorrow is our Independence Day, 58th one, but also to describe to you, to try to define somewhat what defines us as people, the Israeli psyche or the Israeli national character, if there is such a thing. Now, having that as a background, also we are having a very important week in Israel, as our new government will be sworn in 2 days from now. We have a new Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, which I think is a very much fitting to be the ultimate successor for Ariel Sharon. He's a very well-seasoned leader who will be coming shortly to the United States, to Washington, and we will describe his agenda, which is quite ambitious for the next 2, 3, 4 years during his tenure and hopefully beyond. And what is the agenda? I guess we will describe opportunities and risks. There are great risks, unfortunately, in our areas right now, close and not so close distance. The first one is the Hamas government. And the Hamas government is not just a threat to Israel's security. It's not just the fact that they do not recognize our right to exist. It's not just they do not see eye to eye with us and the entire international community. What is the direction? The two-state solution, the roadmap to peace, reconciliation, coexistence. They do pose a security threat, especially with their attitudes, but more with their actions of suicide bombing, of the terror infrastructures that is so massively were laid out under their control and what they have been doing throughout, even under Fatah. But I see the major risk. With this security risk, we can cope. I think Israel, if I can open a parenthesis, has proven to ourselves, but to the entire world, that terrorism can be fought, and I might dare say, can be won. Terrorism is not a plague which is God-sent or God-given. Now, we cannot stop terrorism 100%. There's no 100% success here. But we can reach a rate of prevention of terror of 95%, which we have achieved. And this is quite phenomenal. Had we not done that, we would have had buses and children, buses exploding and children killed on a daily basis. We do not have that situation because after the initial shock that we had about 5 years ago with this intifada, which I think is a misnomer. Intifada is like a popular uprising, but we have a proof, more than intelligence proof, that it was a well-directed, inspired from top down under the old regime of Arafat. Took us a while to go up the learning curve, but once we realized that we can actually move this to the territory of the terrorists. Preemption is a word which is a key element in fighting terror. And without belaboring too much, the result is 5 years after, 95% of all terror activities is being prevented at the beginning. The idea is to go after the entire chain of command, not just the individual suicide bombers, but to go after the commanders, after the dispatchers, after those who finance them, after those who inspire and send them and lead them. So Hamas does not necessarily pose a threat, certainly not an existential threat for Israel. But its dangers for the geostrategic situation in the region goes much beyond that. And that is their agenda. And their agenda, you don't have to take it from me, all you have to do is open their website, is to transform the Palestinian society, which, by the way, is not a very religious society, but to transform it into an Islamic Republic-style Iran. They already sent their leaders to Iran to try to emulate the model of Iran and to bring it over. And that poses a problem because if they are successful, if they can create a mini Iran right in the heart of the Middle East, not only we shut the door on peace for maybe generations to come, but also it may destabilize the entire region as they would like to spread out their message, their very, very extreme message, which does not differ at all from Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, or the message in Tehran to the countries around, and can destabilize what they call the infidel, or what we call moderate Arab regimes. This is a major problem that has to be tackled not just by Israel, but by the entire international community. How do we deal with that? I think it is important to have them face the dilemma. The dilemma should not be ours. That is, whether to deal with them, what are the contact policies with them, are we doing business with them? This should not be our dilemma. The dilemma should be theirs, the Hamas, which supposedly now have the responsibility of governance and governing, have responsibility for the people. And the dilemma for them should be a very short one. Either you change or you fail. There's no other way. We hope they change. How do they change? That's not just for Israel to say. We are trying to be very delicate as much as we can in terms of not dealing with the domestic affairs of our neighbors. But it was the international community that declared what are the parameters of change. They are the quartet, which you know, the four members, United Nations, United States, European Union, and Russia, which declared right after the election of the Hamas that they must meet three prerequisites. First is recognize Israel as a state, and I would add as a Jewish state. Secondly, they must stop the terror and dismantle the infrastructure of terror and incitement. And thirdly, accept all previous international agreements which were adopted and accepted by the Palestinian Authority. If this is the case, I can tell you right here that Israel would see them as a legitimate partner and as an interlocutor. So far, not only they have not accepted that, but they defy this and went over to Iran, as I mentioned, continue with terror. We had a horrible suicide bombing in Tel Aviv, downtown Tel Aviv, the old bus central station, in a restaurant where we had more than 10 killed, 100 injured. Not only they did not condemn, but they supported this. And also, I don't know if this was released to the press or not, but 3 days ago, the Palestinian intelligence forces stopped a terror squad made by people of Hamas who tried to attack the Karni crossing between Gaza and Israel with 300 kilos of TNT, which could have been devastating. So if they do not change, we must not help them succeed, because the consequences would be grave, not just for Israel. And so far, we have a fairly good unified position by most countries. That is not just Israel and the United States, but European countries, Japan, which also stopped now funding and giving money to the Hamas government, which for all practical purposes is a terror entity. Not only they harbor terrorism and support terrorism, they perpetrate terrorism. So without these funds, I don't think they can really be very effective for their own people. And the reason we do not give them the funds are two. One is from a legal point of view, as they are recognized as a terror entity. Hamas is on the terror list of the State Department. Hamas is on the terror list of the European Union. This is why also they stopped the money. They are on the terror list of Israel. We cannot fund them unless they change, as I mentioned before. But also there is the moral point of view. We are not going to fund murderers and terrorists. There is a lesson to be learned here. And I hope that the international community will keep this position, because otherwise it's just going to protract, and we may have a very lengthy period of time without any development or hope for peace. And there is a hope for peace, because if Hamas does change, or if Hamas doesn't change its position, is changed by the people. And the real dilemma is not just for Hamas, for the Palestinian people, who, by the way, did not vote for Hamas overwhelmingly. They did not even get the majority of votes. When all the tallies are in, Hamas did not get more than 44% of the votes. Why did they get an overwhelming majority in the parliament? Because of the system there in the districts. Hamas had one disciplined candidate in each district. Fatah, which was completely in disarray, had 2, 3, sometimes 4 or 5 candidates. Fatah vote was split so many times, and Hamas won. But the Palestinian society is not a religious one. The real strength of Hamas there is about 25%, maybe in a good day, 30% of the entire population. Do we let them hijack the entire Palestinian agenda, which could really gravely affect us and the entire Middle East? No, I don't think we should do it. If they change, that's fine. Where is Israel's agenda here or policies here? Part of the greatness of Prime Minister Sharon, with whom I had the extreme privilege and honor to work. For me, he was not just a national leader and a visionary, it was also a personal friend. So it's very painful to see that he's still in the hospital in the state he is. Part of his greatness was that he realized that and accepted the two-state solution. Understanding that the vision, which was first expressed here in Washington, of two-state solution living side by side with peace and security, and this is very important, living side by side with peace and security, which can give confidence for all, security to all, dignity to all, and justice to all, is important not just for the Palestinians or the Middle East, but also for Israel. For us, the vision of our founding fathers, the vision of most Israelis, is that we keep, and we're very proud of being a democratic country with the rule of law and also a Jewish state. And being Jewish and democratic is very important for us. But keep it both Jewish and democratic. Most of us now understand that we must have a separation, a physical separation and a political separation with the Palestinians. We would like to do it with a partner, but a partner which is effective, which is trustworthy, which is committed to peace, which can meet us halfway, as we are going to make painful decisions towards that, and we are, and we have, and we're going to continue to do that, but they have to do the same. And I don't want to really argue with Palestinians on the past. I don't feel like I have the right to negate their national dreams or ambitions. But I don't think they should do it to me. So the role of leadership is to really bridge the gap between these maximalistic views of national vision or dreams and reality. I think Israelis have accepted it. We see the results of the elections. I hope we can find a partner who will meet us halfway. But in the absence of having such a partner, do we keep our old policy of really being taken hostages by the intransigence of the other side, neutralizing and being paralyzed and locked in an unbearable situation? We don't want that. And this was the greatness of Sharon, which she came and initiated the disengagement, the total evacuation from Gaza. And this is the greatness of Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, who also said that, first of all, we will look for a partner. We would like to do it with a partner. We understand that the finality of the situation, finding a final status agreement, has to be, by definition, agreed by both sides. But the unfortunate thing is that while it takes two to make peace, unfortunately, it takes only one to make war. So if we do not have a partner who is willing to make peace, we may go it alone. By going it alone, meaning consolidate our lines in a way which is going to be very painful for us, like in Gaza, even much more than Gaza. In the case of Gaza, we had to evacuate. We brought in about 9,000 Israelis. Some of them lived for 3 generations in Gaza. It was painful, excruciatingly so. It was a great descent in the country. But not only we survived, we became stronger. Because at the end of the day, with all the demonstration, with being the verge of civil disobedience, some said maybe of even a civil war, at the end of the day, evacuators and evacuees prayed together, cried together, and there was no violence. So democracy prevailed, the rule of law sustained, and this is what we're so proud of. The case of the West Bank is going to be much harder because the numbers, the scope is much, much bigger. But we are not deterred about this. We will have terrible internal complications from social point of view, economic point of view, of course, political point of view. But if we do not find a partner, we will have to move into that direction, which I believe is ultimately a win-win. For Israel, it's making us closer to our vision towards creating a final borders. But I don't have illusions about recognition. I know for the recognition we need also the Palestinians. But at least it can put us in a position whereby we can stay there and hope that something will change and shift fundamentally among the Palestinians. Maybe it will dawn on them the responsibility that they have for their own future. This did not happen, unfortunately, in Gaza. In Gaza, when we decided to leave, there was a debate among us whether to leave partially, whether to leave totally, whether to keep some army installations, whether to keep some control over the borders so there is no smuggling of weapons. But at the end of the day, it was Prime Minister Sharon's decision to move completely, and including all the military installation, including all the crossing points. So the Palestinians will control the crossing points with the monitoring of the Europeans. There was an arrangement, an agreement that was achieved when Secretary of Rice was there in her last visit. And in good faith, we left altogether, taking a risk, a calculated risk, which we see now being really materialized. But we did that for 2 things. First of all, to let the Palestinians be able to govern themselves without any excuses, and to be in a position to look at the international communities in the eyes and tell them, we are not responsible for Gaza anymore. We left the infrastructure there intact, including all the greenhouses, which some of them have been destroyed since then. A few months later in Gaza, still some chaotic situation, lawlessness, and it is unfortunate because the Palestinians don't have us to blame anymore. And I wish they could have attracted some foreign investments in, they could have created some jobs, places of employment for the Palestinians, rehabilitating all those refugee camps with still living there in subhuman conditions. None of this happened, and that's very, very unfortunate. I hope in the case of the West Bank, things will change. So to sum up this issue, I would say that we would like to move forward. And there is a clear direction, 2-state solution, and there is a mechanism to move forward, the roadmap to peace, which was underwritten by the quartet, universally accepted. We just need a partner. And in the absence of a partner, we may have to go it alone. Maybe things will happen over there. It will certainly be less friction for the Palestinians when we move out and give them more control. But I do hope, and I emphasize, that our first priority, our preference, is to not to go alone, but to do it with a partner. So this is what, let's say, the challenges that we have, risks or opportunities in our immediate surrounding. I cannot, stop without talking about Iran, but I'll try to be brief in order to have the questions. Iran is a threat. Is a threat certainly to Israel, but not to Israel, to the Middle East and beyond. I want to make very clear our position. We are not seeing ourselves in the middle. We are not leading the charge against Iran. It's not our confrontation. It's not our war. Although they have threatened to wipe Israel off the map, Ahmadinejad, the new president, is not mincing words about this, but he's not just threatening us. In the same famous speech that he talked about wiping Israel off the map, he also talked about wiping the United States off the map. Somehow it was overlooked by the media. And also he talked about really bringing down these infidel, right, moderate Arab regimes. So clearly it's a major problem. Iran is not only seeking nuclear capabilities, but also delivery means, which makes it doubly dangerous. And it's a danger for the entire international community. I believe this is the most dangerous situation since World War II. And nuclear Iran, with impunity, can continue much more aggressively with its practice and ideology of terrorism and extremism, and nobody will dare touching it through their proxies, or they can go by themselves. They have many proxies in the world, whether it's Hezbollah or Hamas or Islamic Jihad. And they can supply their proxies with some nuclear material as well. So nuclear terrorism could be very, very real. And it can change the entire situation in the Middle East. I don't think that many other countries in the Middle East will stay idle. That could really instigate a nuclear arms race. The world will not be the same. There are some who are afraid of short-term consequences, let's say, with isolating Iran. For instance, a further hike in oil prices. Well, I think that if you take this short-term interest, economic interest, with all due respect, and long-term survivability interest for everybody, I think there's no balance here and there's no dilemma what to choose, especially when I argue with those who look into the economic interests. By having a nuclear Iran, who can guarantee that they will not dictate oil prices as they please, especially against all the neighbors in the Gulf and Saudi Arabia? So after establishing that it's not an Israeli problem or just an Israeli problem, I would really hope, and Israel hopes, that the issue will be solved in the Security Council in peaceful means, and I believe this is doable. So, if you ask me if I'm pessimistic or optimistic, well, I'm paid to be optimistic, but I think we can be more optimistic than pessimists. And although with many challenges that we do have, you, the U.S., on the global arena, we in Israel in the Middle East, I think that with resolve, with creativity, with commitment to peace, the advantages or the optimism should outweigh pessimism. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Ayalon. We have microphones in 4 locations, one here, one up here, one up here, one up here. If you'd like to ask a question, you should go and line up before one of the microphones, and we'll call on you. Now, in the question and answer session, let me be clear. You are the questioner. The ambassador is the answerer. What that means is, ideally with questions, we have 3 characteristics. 1, you identify yourself. 2nd, you make a short, it is short. And 3rd, it ends with a question mark. And I'm here to try and make sure that happens. So let's start right here with a question. Please identify yourself.
Great. Good evening. Short question. As ambassador, I imagine that you spend quite a bit of your time selling the case for Israel and conveying the great things that Israel does. I was curious as to what are some of the things that Israel does that really frustrates you, the things that make your job hard as the ambassador when you're going around the country trying to convince people that the Israeli perspective is the right perspective.
Thank you. Well, maybe much to your frustration, not much frustrates me as far as Israel is concerned. I can tell you one frustration I had just in the last week is when 10 Israelis lay dead in a most gruesome way after the suicide bombing in Tel Aviv. We did not respond. We did not go after the dispatchers. We showed some restraint, and sometimes it is being misconstrued as weakness. So this is one of the frustrations that I can specifically remember from the last week. But most of all, I think representing Israel for me, especially in Washington and the United States, which is our best friend and ally and goes for many years, is a great privilege. And I see a lot of commonalities. I don't know, I hope you do like your country here. I really appreciate very much the U.S. for what it represents. And I do value the friendship between Israel and the United States, which I believe is really in many ways the cornerstone of stability in the Middle East. When Israel and the U.S., their alliance is very evident, it intimidates foes from attacking. When Israel deems vulnerable, even from a perceptual point of view, attacks happen. It's too tempting. 1948, we were attacked. 1973, we were attacked. 1967 would not have attacked had there been deterred. So, for an Israeli diplomat, so not many frustrations in the United States.
Right up here.
My name is Talal. I'm second-year student at the school. Sharon and Olmert have expressed their will to draw the final borders of Israel, and that has been manifested by the building of the wall. And my question to you is, how do you expect to find a partner when the wall is continuously being built inside the West Bank and is separating what is supposed to be Palestine in the future totally from East Jerusalem, and the government has expressed many times that East Jerusalem will never be part of Palestine. And 2 days ago, a small town, Beit Aqsa, has been separated by the temporary wall, although the court has not allowed to do that. So there's a total separation between the West Bank and East Jerusalem. I would like to know, how can you expect a partner in this case?
Yes, well, what you call the wall, we call, and semantics is very important here, we call it an anti-terror fence. And indeed, most of this barrier, if you want to use a neutral term, is really a fence. You have a concrete part, which is maybe 4%. The reason there is some concrete part is against sniping, but never mind. Both, you were not correct, because both Olmert and Sharon did not say that this is a political border. The fence, something which was forced upon us, is a security barrier. And that's what it is, and this is what we have said, and this is what we intend. We did not have this fence. We've been in these territories after this self-defense activities of 1967. So we've been there now 30 years. We didn't build the fence 30 years ago. We didn't build the fence 20 years ago. We didn't build the fence 10 years ago. When did we start building the fence? Only when this onslaught of suicide bombers came, and we decided, after a long analysis, that this is the best way to stop them. And I'll tell you something. It boils down to a science. Wherever we have the fence, and the fence is not complete yet. And why is it not complete yet? Because we appreciate the litigation process, because the government has been challenged by people, either private people or some organizations that challenged the route of the fence. They took us into the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has, in some cases, accepted it. So it compelled the government to change the route in a way which would be less or least protruding or affecting adversely the life for anybody along this route. But it boils down to a science. Where we have the fence, there is no terrorism. There's no infiltration. Where we don't have defense, around Jerusalem area, we do have terror. And the last bombing of a week ago, which I mentioned now for the third time in this address, came from Jerusalem area where there is no fence. But we say that this fence will render itself obsolete once we change the relationship, once there is no potential of terrorism. So it's not a matter of trying to make life miserable for anybody. It's not a land grab. It's not anything like that. Because we could have done it 30 years ago. We did it just as a response to the terror. And I hope one day the relation will be such that these fences will not be necessary.
Right up here.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline, and I'm a second-year student here at the Kennedy School. And you mentioned that you're waiting for a partner on the other side, but Israel's actions can either discourage or encourage that partnership. So what do you see as Israel's role to foster partnership with the Palestinian leadership?
That's a very good question. And let me tell you that I think in the past 5 years, we bent over backwards, I think, in trying to do that. And let me explain. When Prime Minister Sharon was first elected as Prime Minister, it was February of 2001. I mean, given his record as a great military man, people were quite looking at it adversely, most of all the Palestinians. And surprise, surprise, he was the one, I think, with the weight, with the great credibility among the Israeli people, to be able to present concessions. Now, when Prime Minister Sharon first came to office, he talked about compromises. He talked about painful compromises to the Palestinians in order to achieve peace. He said, we're willing to really pay dearly, but for a real peace, with security, genuine peace for generations. The Palestinians' response, some Arab countries, was, well, this is just talk. Talk is cheap. It's not very specific. We need to have a political horizon. We have to have a goal. We want to see what's on the ground. They just derided that. He went on a few months later to talk for the first time about the end of occupation. It was Prime Minister Sharon in June of 2003. Again, just talks. Then he talked about two-state solution. Still, they said it's too esoteric. It's much in the air. Then he accepted the roadmap to peace, Sharon, which showed exactly face-to-face what to do. And still the Palestinians didn't come forward. And then he uprooted Israeli Jewish communities. And he's still looking, and Olmert is looking for a partner. We do have a vision. Israel said, we accept the notion, we accept the idea, we accept the fact of Palestinian state. This was not self-evident for us. And it's not without risks that we're doing that. We have accepted that. Now let's negotiate on the terms. So they have this political horizon. They know that we are willing to take painful compromises. We have done it. We have shown that we can do it, whether it's in Gaza or whether it's in the West Bank. We have the way to move forward, which is the roadmap to peace. But it cannot be a credible process with violence. You cannot just talk and kill each other at the same time. It doesn't work. It didn't work in Camp David 2000. It didn't work through the 13 years now since Oslo of 1993. It will not work now. So what we ask from the Palestinians is, for one time, to stop terror activities. Stop incitement. Think of the future. And I think until we have that, until we have a leadership over there which is committed to this, nothing can move forward. We have said already, we are not hiding any cards. We're talking about two-state solutions. We left Gaza altogether. We're going to leave major parts of the West Bank. And we still say this is not the end of it. Let's negotiate and let's talk. You mentioned Jerusalem. Who mentioned Jerusalem? Here. Yeah. Well, Jerusalem, we have a position. for generations. Jerusalem was a capital of the Jewish people, wasn't ever, look at the history books, a capital of any other country. Palestine, where did the name Palestine come from? Well, here I shouldn't ask, you probably all know history much better than me. But the Romans tried to sever any contacts, any ties between Jewish people and their Jewish land. So they changed the name of Israel or Zion to Palestine, which stuck, right? Still called Palestine. It was a mandate and was called Palestine under the Ottomans and British. They also tried to change the name of Jerusalem to what? Ilia Capitolina. But this did not stick. Jerusalem prevailed. So we have a lot to say about Jerusalem. Should that preclude negotiations? Let's talk. Everything is open. Everybody has their position. But we should talk and not fight and kill each other. And this is the key.
Right here.
Shalom, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Dr. Brian Cole, and I'm an internal medicine and public health physician here in Massachusetts and the beautiful islands of Hawaii. So warm aloha to you also, Mr. Ambassador. I have a statement and then a question. My statement is I was recently in Prague, Czech Republic, and I'd like to extend my apologies and say that I'm so sorry all the destruction of the Jewish community all over the world. That was just very touching and very cruel what they did to your people. I apologize, and I am so sorry to you all, officially. That's from my heart to you all. My question to you is, many Jewish scholars have taught me at Yale and Boston University School of Medicine, I'm proud to say, and I'm impressed with the culture and the history and the flavor and the ethnicity of the Mediterranean. I'd love to see Israel, like the islands of Hawaii, promote international tourism to your wonderful country, because your country has a history of intellectual and spiritual leaders that impact the world. Do you have any plans to increase tourism to your beautiful country and history?
Well, the short question is yes, absolutely yes. We certainly have the sites, from historical, archaeological sites. We do have the beaches and the seas. We have actually 4 seas. We have the Mediterranean, we have the Red Sea, we have the Dead Sea, and we have the Sea of Galilee, which are all beautiful. And mostly we have sunshine, unlike some other parts or cities, or even Washington had blue sky this morning. So, but yes, we do intend to promote that. We have suffered gravely during this violence. We had a banner year in 2000, the millennium, where many Christian pilgrims came. The Pope came to visit us and brought with him 2 million. Was a real record year. Since then, we went down with the violence, but now it's picking up again. Since we did find somewhat a solution for terrorism, it did pick up, and we're coming back almost to the pre-Intifada record. We also plan to keep developing our land, which, what we have been doing all these years for the last 58 and even before was defending ourselves, but not just doing that, also building the country, thinking about the future, building great infrastructure, a good economy, basically based on high tech, and also tourism. The Negev, the Negev desert, which Shira mentioned here. Why is it for us a big desert? Although it's really a speck on the map, but the Negev desert comprises 60% of the entire land of Israel. Yet it inhabits only 9% of the population. So we still have great plans to double the population of the Negev, and also to make the Negev a cluster for 3 different areas. One is a high-tech area, and we're building the infrastructure for that. Also for natural resources. There are many minerals there. And the third is for tourism. Could be beautiful desert trips over there with craters, moonlight, and all other attractions. So this is the longer answer.
Right here.
Good evening. My name is Richard. I consider myself a citizen of the world, albeit a carrier of a U.S. passport. I just returned from Medinat Yisrael and also from Ramallah in Palestine. I went through Kalandia. I witnessed the wall and saw what it did in that particular area. First of all, a survey was released by the Palestine Center for Policy and Research within the last 2 weeks that refutes Hamas's statement of a desire of the Palestinian people to recover their homes, their lands, their ancestral whatevers in Israel. The study found that 75% of the Palestinian population is willing to take financial compensation in exchange for returning themselves to their ancestral lands, which is a hopeful sign. I was in Medinat Yisrael when the Pigua occurred in Tel Aviv. Everyone expected a reaction the next morning. There was great glee in the fact that Israel didn't respond because there's negotiations taking place between Israeli governmental and non-governmental forces with the Palestinian people, as opposed to directly Hamas, led by Khalid Mashal in Damascus. Yeah, the question is, what is your belief about the policies that are being executed by the Omert government, which is coming into power, that circumvents direct relations with Hamas leadership, that focuses on Abu Mazen, who condemned the Pigua, correct? And where do you see the government leading the Palestinian people so that the Palestinian people direct their government, which happens to be Hamas today?
Yes, I also saw the polls. I hope they're credible. About 75% of the Palestinians understand that Israel is there to stay and willing to coexist with them, which also is a manifestation, if you will, of the disconnect between the Hamas government and the people. So in that respect, if the Hamas does not change, I think there is a great legitimacy for them being removed, hopefully in a peaceful way, by the Palestinians. In terms of Ehud Olmert's policies, is to negotiate with a credible Palestinian partner. Hamas so far is not a partner like that. Abu Mazen could easily be a partner. I believe his rhetoric is good. I believe he is well-intentioned. He condemned the suicide bombing. He is against violence. And he won in an overwhelming, decisive victory just a year and a half ago when he became president with 63% of the vote. Unfortunately, he did not translate this big mandate he got from the people into an effective policy. And we see the results today. I believe that the Prime Minister will meet Abu Mazen and certainly would like to hear from him what are his plans. And I do hope that his plans, to the extent that they are peaceful plans, succeed.
Right up here.
Hi, my name is Mishi Harman. I'm from Jerusalem, and I'm a student at the college as well. And I have a question about your job, which is that in the 1960s, my grandfather was Israel ambassador in Washington for 9 years. And
this must have been Abe Harman?
Yeah. And throughout that period, there was one official visit of an Israeli prime minister in America. And I wanted to ask, how has the role of ambassador changed today with so many new, both official and unofficial channels of communication between the administrations?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, on the face of it, from a very perfunctory look, you may think that the role of diplomacy has changed. 200 years ago, I mean, you couldn't do without these diplomats. They were carrying the messages. The messages could not come from thousands of miles ago, so they created their own policy, right, where they were talking to kings and queens and whatever. Certainly this is not the case now, but with all technology, with emails and faxes on whatever, there is no substitute to presence on the ground. And granted, president can pick up the phone and speak to a leader. Foreign minister can speak to their counterparts. But they can do it only so often. And their attention span is very short because today there's so much on their plates. So the role of ambassador is really carrying the message on a continuous basis, or to make sure that the messages or the policy, the mutual policy that has been decided, is being followed up to. And there are many questions that a foreign minister will not ask his colleague. So he asked the ambassador. But this is just a very limited scope of doing the diplomatic work, which is arrangements, which is negotiations, which is contacts between governments. It's much more than that. If you ask me what is the role of an ambassador, if every ambassador is, as I was asked before, to sell the country, but it's not just to sell the country, it's to really build coalition of supports for one's countries and ideas. And you cannot do it just from thousands of miles away, and you cannot do it just by sporadic visits from ministers or prime ministers. You have to do it on the ground in contacts with the media, the national media, local media, with Congress, with grassroots, with the business community, to promote bilateral trade. I am very, I don't think it's very much known, but I'm very proud of the fact that Israel is the largest trading partner of the United States in the Middle East. We are a country of only 7 million, yet we buy 33% of all American services and goods which are sold in the Middle East. It's also part of the embassy to promote. So the role of diplomacy is crucial, live and well. And we have great respect for your grandfather, which was one of the really founding fathers of Israel Foreign Service. He was a great, great ambassador. And if you want a personal note about the job, it's not easy, many challenges, but for some reason there are so many who want this job. So that tells you.
We have time for 2 more questions right here.
Good evening. My name is Luc Roulet. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. I just want to go back to Jerusalem. You mentioned that you're open to discuss about the future of Jerusalem, and I would like to have your opinion on the fact that it seems that around the roadmap, and even asking Israelis and Palestinians, the only viable solution would be some kind of sharing of Jerusalem. So how will you be able to share the capital, seeing now that the wall around Jerusalem is going very far east, and I think there are plans to go as far as Ma'ale Adumim. So how, let's say even 4 or 5 years from now, when there might be another government in Palestine, how will you be able to realize this vision of a joint capital?
I need to drink some water before answering that. I did not say we are willing to negotiate Jerusalem. I said we should come, everything is on the open. We will bring our position, they should bring their position. I think it would be not just counterintuitive, but it will be counterproductive to start discussing a negotiation here in public. And suffice to say that we will come with really good faith, and we would expect the other partner to come with good faith. Our position on Jerusalem is very clear. Jerusalem should not be divided. Jerusalem is a united capital of Israel. I don't delude myself their position. Let's meet and talk. There's a lot to talk about. But any pre-negotiation just will preempt our position, and I think it will not be wise to do.
I'm afraid this will have to be the last question. Right here.
Thank you. My name's Afsane. I'm a first-year Harvard Business School student. And I guess one of the major things I've learned during my first year at the business school is that all money and funding comes with influence and with strings. And I understand the motivation of Israel and of the U.S. and of Japan and the European Union to not fund a government that promotes terror. But I guess 2 questions. Do you ever worry that now that funding is coming from states like Iran and potentially Saudi Arabia, that, in the interim, while Hamas will either change, which may or may not happen, or will fail, which may or may not happen in the interim, that the Palestinian people will be increasingly under the influence of people who are very anti-Israel, and that they will become more radicalized, and that at the time when the situation is different, it may not be 75% of the population that agrees with the state of Israel. And so do you worry about that? And secondly, what do you think that Israel can do in the interim to mitigate that risk?
Yes, well, thank you. This was a very good question, and it will help me clarify some things. Well, first of all, no, I don't think that the Hamas can turn into others for financing. I mean, it may turn to Iran, which is its natural ally, or Syria. But let me tell you, if one has to count on financial support from Iran or Syria, they are in bad shape. Well, they have gotten some pledges from Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, Arab League. I don't think it's sustainable. Certainly not from Iran and Syria, which have not much money. So they may give some sporadic amounts, but certainly not sustainable. And it is important to keep the funds away from Hamas. At the same time, we are very clear in saying that we do not want to punish the Palestinian people, certainly not want to cause any harm to newborn babies, children, mothers, or what have you. And it is our utmost interest to prevent any humanitarian disaster. And we're talking with the Americans. There was the meeting of the donor countries in London just a week ago to find mechanisms to channel support and aid to the Palestinian people without the involvement of Hamas. And you can do it through some NGOs which will have been already, or some being vetted out so they are not in cahoots or involved in terrorism. There are some UN agencies, some people-to-people, and certainly we do not like to see all projects stop. And it is very, very important for us that the Palestinians will not have any humanitarian disaster. We will see to it that it doesn't happen.
Ambassador, thank you very much.